Welcome to Native Exiles, Alderwood Community Church's podcast, where we explore the tension of being in the world, but not of it. We're continuing in our parenting series, going to explore the option of sending our kids to public school. This is a divisive issue. It's a tough issue. We ask ourselves as parents, am I going to ruin my kids? Am I sinning? Got some good friends here tonight to answer this question for us, Paul and Janelle Narancic. And we're looking forward to going there with you right now on Native Exiles. Well, I'm really excited today to be here with two friends, Paul and Janelle Narancic, and we're continuing our parenting series talking about an issue that is pretty weighty to most parents. Where am I going to send my kids to school? And specifically, we're going to talk about the option of sending our kids to public school. You guys have a really unique take on that. Not only in that, like my wife and I, your kids are in public schools, but you, Paul, currently work in a public school. Janelle, you taught in a public school for many years. So I'm just going to start out by asking you first, Paul, like how did you end up in this career? Was this something you always wanted to do, or are you like doing penance for some sin from your youth?
Tell them what you wanted to do when you were little.
Speaking of penance, I did grow up Catholic.
Interesting.
So I grew up going to the Catholic school, pretty much 3rd through 8th grade.
Okay.
Then I decided I couldn't wait to get out of the Catholic school. So I went to the public school for 1 year. And I thought, oh no, I'm getting a lot of trouble here. So I better go back to Catholic school. So ended up going to Blanchette High School in Seattle and graduated. But I actually always wanted to become a garbage man.
For real.
Wow.
Yeah, totally serious.
That was his dream.
That's amazing. But you chose a much less lofty goal, and now you're working
Yes,
in public
that's
schools.
true. So,
what do you do, Paul, in the public school?
I work at a middle school, and I'm a school counselor, and I coach girls basketball and boys basketball.
How many years?
About 30 years.
Just a few.
Yeah.
So you've seen a lot. 30 years in public education is a long stint.
Absolutely.
That's fantastic. Janelle, you were in the public schools as well. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah. So I have a twin sister, and growing up, we would play school constantly. It was my dream to be a school teacher. She also became a school teacher. And I started off my teaching career in Oregon. So I taught there 7 years or so. Met Paul, got married, moved here, and taught for 3 years in the North Shore School District before we had our first child, and stopped teaching. And when we had a second child, daughter, and when they both became school age full time, I went back to substitute teaching. And so for the last 12 years or so, I've been substituting in the North Shore School District as well.
What grade did you teach when you were teaching?
Mostly 5th and 6th grade. And I really loved those ages, but my last year of teaching, I just wanted something different. And the only thing that was available was 1st grade. And I took it. And I always tell people a 1st grade teacher and a 6th grade teacher, it's just a completely different job.
Oh, yeah.
And I wish I would have had more years teaching 1st grade, because I think I would have really liked it. But it's a whole different world. Yeah.
So you guys have some very real firsthand experience. And as you just mentioned, Janelle, you have 2 kids currently in public schools. What are their ages? What grades are they in?
So we have a son, and he is a junior and 17 years old. And we have a daughter who is a sophomore, and she's 15, just about to turn 16.
So they're in the closing years of their public school stint. Well, let's jump right into this one, because like I said, this is a hot topic, a weighty topic. Just to set it up, I share a couple of stories that might be of interest to people. I'm a missions pastor. And one of the things that's always interesting to me when I talk to couples that are exploring the possibility of going overseas as missionaries, almost inevitably their first question is, how are my kids going to get an education?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, as parents, that question is pretty high on our list. We're really concerned. But to lean into the piece about people, getting kind of fiery about this, I was in a situation, I don't know whether to call it a conversation or a confrontation, years ago. I was at a restaurant, met a guy from the church at Red Robin. We had to meet about some church business. I don't remember what it was. I didn't know him super well. we were chatting about our families at one point. I asked him about his kids, where they go to school. Oh yeah, they go to a local private Christian school. And he was telling me what a great experience that was for him and his family and his kids. And then he asked me, and I said, well, yeah, both my daughters go to the local elementary school in our neighborhood. And he paused and looked up from his French fries at me like I couldn't have been more in danger of the fires of hell. Like, what are you thinking, putting your kids in harm's way like that? You know, do you want to churn out little debauched, godless, reprobates? And, you know, I mean, honestly, I couldn't even have a conversation with him because his mind was so settled. So let's start with that part of the conversation. As parents are weighing out the pros and cons and struggling through this, Christian parents, I think for a lot of people, the negatives kind of rise to the top. What are some of the negatives that you guys have either wrestled with or heard other people wrestle with as they're talking about this?
Probably word a little some of the same concerns that maybe this other guy had that where he sent his kids to the Christian school. You just never know what type of people are going to be there in the public school and what type of friends are they going to get? Are they going to lose their faith when they end up going to a public school? What are the teachers going to be like? What type of curriculum are they teaching? And so all those questions are kind of spinning around the back of our heads, you know, so that's.
Yeah. And I just remember, you know, when you bring that little baby home, you just want to do everything you can to protect your child. And for me as a mom, I felt like the struggle for me was I had this notion that if I sent them to a private school, I would be protecting them. Mm-hmm. And if I send them to the public school, we still refer to it. Sometimes I refer to it with my daughter as the jungle. I'd be sending them out into the jungle. And so, you know, but having been in the school as teachers ourselves, we know that that's really just not true. But you do have that instinct to just protect. And the idea that private school is the way to protect
That's
them.
A perfect way to set it up, Janelle. Protect is a key word. And I mean, what are we trying to protect them from? You mentioned a few things, Paul, but I mean, let's talk about a few, you know, specific things. Like let's talk about friends. You know, that's one of the ones I've heard a lot of people say, well, I at least want them to have, you know, Christian friends, want them to have a positive influence around them socially. What would you guys say to that concern?
Well, I guess I would start with one of those things about the friendship issue is if there are no lights in a public school, then who is going to be that light for others?
For other people's kids to have a positive influence in their lives.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so I think that was one of the big, and even the, you know, a verse in the Bible talks about, you know, we're going to be in the world, but don't be of the world, because God knows we're going to be around other people that have different beliefs, different values, different morals than what we have. And so if you take all those values out, that whole God component out of the public school setting, what are you going to be left with? There'll be no light for other kids to see or to have a guide, you know, right there for you.
But, you know, I think playing a little bit of a devil's advocate here, you know, I mean, I think a parent might say to that, well, yeah, but like they're not going to stay salt and light because they're going to be overcome by the darkness, you know? Mm-hmm. So, Janelle, what would you say to that? I mean,
well, you really have a big assumption there. And the assumption is that the public school is darkness, that all the kids attending, they're just all lost souls and they're going to corrupt my kids. And anything good that I've put into my kids is just going to be washed away by all that negative influence they're going to be around, which just really isn't the case. You get people from all walks of life that are sending their kids to public school. And just like at private school, you're also getting people from all walks that are sending their kids for a lot of different reasons. Mm-hmm. It's not always just because we want them to be grounded in their faith and we're strong Christians. And so we're sending our kids here. A lot of people send their kids to private school for a variety of reasons. So you can't also assume that everyone there has little angels walking around that are, you know, completely positive influences on your children. So we have found that to be opposite. Our kids have really made really good connections in the public school.
And I think it really begins at home. If you send your kids to school with a solid, grounded faith, then I think you have less worry about someone else that's going to steal that faith away or taint your own kids.
How do you do that, Paul? I mean, how do you strengthen your kids in their faith and feel confident that they're going to be able to withstand what they might face?
First of all, just instilling godly principles, biblical principles, either through church and different programs like we have here at ASM on Wednesday nights. And I remember even...
And ASM is our
ASM is
ministries.
Alderwood Student Ministries,
Yep.
yeah. So certain things like that. And even when they were really young, we had them in cubbies and the little... Awanas things,
yeah.
Things that really help strengthen their faith and just to be introduced to God. And another thing is praying with our kids. And also, really one of the most important things is, and I think that's really been effective for our kids, is Janelle would usually take the kids to school because I would be at work by the time the kids go. But she would always pray for the kids right before they got out of that car. She would pray for the kids that they would be, if there's anyone that looks like they're lonely that day or they're eating lunch alone, you pick that kid out.
Did you do that out loud, Janelle, with the kids, or was that just something you did on your own?
No, that was something I did with the kids. I really, to add to what Paul was saying, I really can't stress enough the power of prayer, though. I just feel like if you've covered your kids in prayer and if you are praying with them daily, there is that sense of everything's going to be okay. No matter what happens, the Holy Spirit is walking beside them through whatever struggles they're going to face. But as far as the prayer thing goes, I never made a big deal or a big, now it's time to pray and bow our heads. It was just talking to God in the car.
Yeah.
Just talking about their day. If they had something going on, I said, well, let's ask God to help you with that. And I remember, especially when they were little, they'd get out the door and I'd always say, be a leader and a light, be a leader and a light. And that was my thing. I just wanted them to kind of have
the last
that
thing they leave that car door with is be a leader in the light. So,
and we had, the other thing too, is we had bus service available to us. And Paul would often say, why don't you just have the kids take the bus? But I just think that time is so valuable in the morning. Good. If you're able to do it. I know a lot of parents can't, they've got work and whatnot. But the more time that you're able to spend with your kids, because they're gone for almost 8 hours a day, all of those are valuable minutes where you are feeding into them and preparing them to go out into the world.
And you would even give their friends a ride too, and you'd still pray with their friends that weren't even believers.
Even
so
in
she'd
high
still
school,
pray in the car with the kids.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying this like, oh, I do anything great, but I just think it's an opportunity again to witness, especially with my son when he was going to school really early in the mornings for weightlifting and whatnot. We'd pick up some friends, and I so enjoyed getting to talk with his friends and spend that time in the morning and find out about their day. And it was always just a short little prayer. Didn't have to be anything big. It was just mentioning, God, take care of these boys today. Be with them as they take their tests or whatever it may be. And
that is so significant in my mind. And I really love that you prayed out loud with them, because that's more than just them hearing, the prayer and planting it in their mind. It's your example as a parent. And I think one of the assumptions that is behind a lot of people's concerns and fears in this issue of, the social influence and the negative things they might face, is that those things are stronger than our role as parents. And that's right. I'm with you, Janelle. I certainly wouldn't want to stand here and take any credit for the grace that God has poured out on my kids. But at the same time, it reminds me, in one of our earlier episodes on parenting, we were talking about the well-known passage in Deuteronomy 6, where God instructs parents to talk with their kids while they're on the way, while they're on the road, in the everyday moments of life. And I just think we as parents can often underestimate the role and the influence we have. The studies show that in the long term, parents don't actually affect a lot of things they think they affect. They don't affect a lot of their kids' habits and other things. Nature wins out over nurture on that stuff. But what a lot of the studies show is that in the area of spiritual and religious beliefs, parents, hands down, even if your kid is sitting there in class with a rabid atheist teacher, and we'll get to that in a moment, we have the upper hand because God's created it that way. Let's talk a little bit more about some of the egregious things. Let's talk about sexuality, because I think for a lot of parents, that's a big one, that their kids are going to get really horrible messages about sex in school, whether it's overtly from a teacher or from the kids around them. What would you guys say to that specific concern?
Well, that again is something that we talk about. We started talking to them about when they're fairly young. Like, how old would you say we start
Oh,
just bringing that? Because we wanted them to hear it from us before they hear it from their
we're,
friends.
we're also
Yes.
very open, so we're probably a little too open,
I
but
think we have another episode here that we might need to explore.
we were really open though, and we always addressed things, at their level, and when they had questions, we talked about it, and
Mm-hmm.
even me, maybe more so than Paul, I've always been, you can ask me anything you want to ask me, and I will answer it to the best of my ability. So we did talk about all of those sorts of topics, even when they were little, where babies come from, and about sex and sexuality. And I think that for our family, the kids really, they not only knew our beliefs,
Mm-hmm.
they are their beliefs because of the foundation they have through our church, through Alderwood, and through what we've done together through family, Bible reading and
Mhm.
whatnot, attending church. But also, I gotta say, if the people that are listening do not have their kids involved in a youth group that they love, find one, because our kids adore the youth group here at
Yeah.
Alderwood, and they do such a good job talking about these types of issues in the school.
Incidentally,
It's
that's
Love
our
Month.
It's
Love
Love
Month,
Month,
right?
right? They're
Yeah.
very openly speaking about these issues.
Yeah, and so that's really helping prepare them to be out there with a variety of different peoples and their beliefs. And they, it's interesting. We have discussions at home. They come home and talk about, what's happening at school. But for the most part, we have not found teachers to be blatantly just throwing that out there into their lessons. It
Mhm.
really hasn't happened like that.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, that actually brings up a question I really want to make sure we get on the table. And
Mhm.
I'll direct this to you, Paul, because you're on the front lines right now. Do you think, Janelle just kind of answered this specifically on the sexuality question, but do you think there are certain issues that maybe tend to get overblown by Christian parents that might not be as egregious or as bad as we think they are in the public schools?
Yeah, just that one specific topic
Mhm.
about sexuality or whatnot. I think that tends to get overblown. But the good thing is, if you're in a public school, you have the right to remove your child from, maybe they're going to be talking about, sex
Right.
about,
In a way that
pregnancies
you're
and
not
so forth.
comfortable with.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
You have total right as a parent to pull your kid from that for that day or whatnot. And some parents do that. There's
Yep.
nothing wrong with that whatsoever.
Yeah,
Because a lot of parents just want to share it with themselves. They don't want to have a teacher do it.
Right.
They'd rather do it themselves.
You'd rather have that conversation with your kids. And we found in our experience that most teachers were pretty willing to tell us what they were going to
Exactly. Yeah.
teach. And there wasn't a big secret or anything like that.
They even actually have a curriculum night where they can go in where the teacher talks for 30 minutes about what they're going to be sharing on the health. They'll have the
At least in our
principal and the
district,
teacher
they've done
will have like a curriculum night for health, for instance, about what they're going to cover.
Right.
And they'll even have like a little form of, hey, if you don't want your student here for any specific parts of it, then you're welcome to, they can come up to the library and work on their homework or something like that. So.
And I know as a 6th grade teacher for many years, both in Oregon and in Washington, the curriculum, because we had to address, it was more on a just health level, the parts of the body and that sort
Right.
of thing. But we were instructed, and this is back then, so maybe things have changed a little, but I think they're still running similar programs. We were instructed, do not answer values questions. If kids write down questions, because there was a question and answer period, and it's when's the right age to have sex, for example.
Mhm.
You're not supposed to answer that as a teacher. You're
Right.
supposed to say, hey, this was a question that was asked, and this is a values question. This is something you should go home and you should talk to your family about, because every family has their own opinion on these issues. And I really stuck by that. Now, I'm not saying all teachers do.
Yeah.
But-
That's what this would be a good one to wrap up this section.
Mm-hmm.
I think as you say that, I can imagine some parents sitting out there and going, oh, that's not what I've heard.
Yeah.
I've heard the story
Mhm.
about this. I watched the movie God's Not Dead,
Yep,
with
yep.
the hostile professor
Mhm.
who was challenging everyone's faith. How real again, you've kind of answered this, but how real do you think that opposition actually is in the schools to Christian faith? Especially at the level we're talking. We're talking through secondary. It
Yeah.
might be a different story if you were in a, college setting.
Yeah.
But let's talk about through secondary.
In terms of a teacher talking about, give me an example.
Well,
what
I'm thinking of a teacher who, in a science class, might overtly attack the Christian faith and say it's just utter nonsense. Anyone who believes this is completely hoodwinked.
I've been doing this for quite a few years. I've never heard that, and I believe in this day and age with the media and everything else, I think that if something like that did happen from a teacher, they would be exposed right away, and then
one of the positive sides of social media.
It would never come out that blatant. We have experienced. We're going to be honest. We have experienced times where our kids have come home and said, "You know what so and so said," and it's subtle, but they pick up on it.
A teacher or a student?
A teacher. Only one time through Weston's education, he's a junior now, only one time did I ever make a phone call to a teacher about something that was said. And he had caught it on his cell phone. And it actually wasn't the teacher. It was a guest speaker they had brought in. And it was for a food and nutrition class. And it was totally off topic. It was at the very end. And he basically just gave his 2 cents on some political views and things that were out there. And Weston caught some of it on his phone. And he brought it home. And I listened to that. And I thought, this really is worth contacting the teacher. Not going above the teacher, not going to the principal, not going to the superintendent, just reaching out to the teacher to say, can you tell me more about this?
Yeah.
And you know what? It was just a wonderful, positive experience. She responded and she said, you're absolutely right. I don't know what her faith is or what her beliefs are, but she said, you're absolutely right. And she talked to the kids in class the next day and apologized and said that was not their regular speaker and he would not be coming back because that's not what you do in a class. You don't get off topic like that. And it was just inappropriate. And it really made me feel good because I've never wanted to do that before, put a teacher on the spot, but she handled it really well. It was handled well with the kids. It just gave me a whole new respect for her classroom and the way she's running it and the ability to, contact teachers.
It's one of his favorite classes too.
Yeah. So
I love that you've moved us already to where I want us to go, which is towards the positive. So we've covered some of the, negatives, some of the cons. We could have added more. Some people might bring up the quality of education versus there's a lot of things, but let's pause here for a moment, take a break, and we'll come back and talk about some of the positives.
Okay.
That was super helpful. Really appreciate both of you taking seriously that there are negatives when we consider this question of sending our kids into the public schools, but offering some really constructive advice in terms of how you've navigated it. As we try to move more into maybe concrete advice and some of the positives, I want to hit you guys with a question that I think is worth thinking through, because I know another thing that would be going through some minds of people out there is, you guys are talking about this like it's a considered option for Christian parents, but for a lot of parents, it's just simply a reality. You can't afford to send them to Christian school or private school, and you can't, handle homeschooling because you're working or whatever, so you're just stuck with it. So, let me ask you the question, if all 3 options were on the table for you guys with your kids, private school, private Christian school, homeschooling, or public school, would you still choose public school if money weren't an option? You could have any of the 3.
I'd have to say it would have been very tempting to send our kids to a private Christian school when they were younger, if it was free. But having said that, and now that our kids have gone through public school, I would never go back.
Really?
I think it's been a huge blessing for our kids, for other kids, and even for us as parents, is to be able to have our kids go through the public school setting.
What about you, Janelle?
Like you said, it would have been tempting. But one of the considerations that I would have to think about, even if it was free, is just, where's the location of the school? Because you are stuck. You have to transportation. If your kids get involved in any activities, It's always at that school. There's no busing. But even more than just the busing and transportation issues, the kids that are around aren't going to be their neighborhood kids. And there's something really special about your kids getting to know and spend time with the kids in their area that they're nearest to. there's so many more opportunities for them to, outside of school, get to know those kids and invite them to things and spend time with them. And that would have been tough at a public school where you're drawing from all sorts of different areas. And so I really value those friendships. And that would have been on my mind, thinking about those types of things. And like Paul said, now that they've been in the public school, I wouldn't have gone. Even if it was free, I would have kept them. Knowing what we know now, I would keep them where they're at.
That's really interesting and encouraging to hear. I mean, highlight some of the benefits then that you see. Like, what have been some of the biggest positives you've seen come out of sending your kids to public school?
I would say even some of the things I talked about earlier in terms of being a light for other kids.
Yeah.
Being able to invite kids places, even to come to church with us every once in a while.
Yeah.
And it really has gotten to the point to where even with some of our kids' friends, we invite their parents to come to church, like on maybe Christmas or on Easter, and especially the kids themselves. Our kids invite to go to church as well. So that in and of itself is a real huge blessing. And that was really the whole main point of us having our kids in a public school, is really to, once again, just to be that light. And also when they do get a job, if they were in the Christian school their whole life and they're around other people that are just like them, they're not really that diverse in terms of their friendships and so forth. So I think that's going to help them out when they go to college and especially in a job situation, because we're going to be working with all sorts of different people.
Sure.
And probably 60 or 70% of them are not going to be evangelical Christians.
Right.
So it'll be good for them. They can be a light wherever they go, whether it's on a sports team or whether it's in a job situation or even in college.
I'm intrigued by that was an intentional choice on your part, that you wanted them to be a light. It sounds like you spent less time worrying about the negatives than seeing the positives.
Oh, I worried.
Set the record straight.
I'm a worrier, but we did intentionally want them to be lights. And it just, even in a practical sense, I don't know, we haven't been to a private school ourselves and we haven't sent our kids, but I know
plenty of
people who have. And we even have a friend who was attending one and then switched over to the public high school. And some of those private schools are really small, and those kids are around some even only have one class per grade. So you are with those kids year after year after year. And if there are friendships and relationships that aren't clicking or whatnot, you're kind of stuck. Whereas just on a practical point of view, the public school is large usually. You've got a lot of
huge diversity.
Yeah, you've got a lot of choices and classes. Even in high school, all the electives and opportunities you have that you don't always have at a private school. So even setting aside, the Christian aspect of it, just on a practical level, our kids are taking classes they wouldn't necessarily be able to take at private schools.
That's a great point too, in terms of education. I want to come back to something you just said though, because you got our feet back on the ground. You did worry. And I want to be careful, to make a caveat here. I mean, we are not in any way trying to say that this is an easy decision or that everyone should approach it the way we are. These are tough decisions. In fact, off the record a little earlier, we were talking about the fact that this also depends maybe on where you live. I mean,
absolutely, yeah.
Some public schools probably are pretty rough.
Yeah, and I could touch base on that. Myself, a friend of mine, he and I went to Blanchette together, which is the Catholic school. But
right.
His daughter, they live out kind of near the airport.
Okay, SeaTac.
Yeah, out by SeaTac, and his daughter had been going to the Catholic school like K through 8th grade, and then in 9th grade, he's like, I don't want to send her to the public school around here because of the dynamics of it.
Yeah.
And so I said, well, have you thought about a Christian school? And, he goes, hey, we're actually have our eyes on one, I think it was Seattle Christian.
Yeah, that's right down
That's
there.
out there. Yeah. So anyway, I was kind of excited. It's like, oh, well, cool. So she's going to, so anyway, to make a long story short, she's going to Seattle Christian. She loves it.
Cool.
She's having a great time there. And the good thing is, I think she's learning more about God and learning than she would probably at a public school, just because now she's going to be around a lot of lights there.
Yeah, no one size fits all here.
I almost think the kids who aren't from Christian families send them to the private schools, send the
That's
Christian kids
right.
to the
Yeah.
public schools, let them have that experience and get that,
Yeah.
needed, time and information and Bible teaching. And
That warrants a good aside here too, because my family background, my dad was a public school educator for many years, and a lot of my extended family, we just had a lot of people in education and mostly in the public schools. And so I've had that cross pollination because I attended a private Christian high school myself. And I agree with you. There's something really rich about getting into both worlds. Like, again, I wouldn't make this a hard and fast rule, but I've often encouraged Christian parents, if your kids went to a private Christian school growing up, you might really consider sending them to a secular school for college or vice versa.
Yeah.
And there's developmental arguments and everything there that can be made, but just seeing both worlds is I think really important. Yeah, that's really helpful. Okay, I want to go another direction now. Like, I think you guys touched on this earlier. You've had some meaningful conversations with your kids over the years, and I wonder, if some of those conversations wouldn't actually have ever happened if they hadn't been in the public school. What are some of the meaningful conversations that you've been able to have, whether it's around certain topics or maybe even specific conversations that have probably grown out of their experience in the public schools? Can you think of anything?
Well, I'm not going to say that our kids haven't ever been fed information that's contrary to maybe our beliefs and what we, have been teaching
Which happens
them.
the moment you turn on the television.
It does.
Right?
And so we've had times where we've been maybe talking about a political issue or something, and maybe our daughter has said, well, that's not the way it is. And, kind of playing devil's advocate with us. And it's led us down roads of conversation that probably wouldn't have happened if she was at a private school, because I'm sure most of the teachers there would be feeding her the information we're feeding her.
Generally, it's more homogenous,
Yeah,
right? It's
right.
pretty predictable what you're going to hear.
So we've had discussions about politics. We've had discussions about creation.
Yeah.
Because they get a little bit of that in science class. And there was a period where I was a little concerned about, okay, we got to really keep on top of what they're learning. But to see them grow in their faith now and to be challenged with these questions has only strengthened their faith. And I think without that challenging, it's not that you're going to be without faith, but I don't know how strong your faith becomes.
I really wonder that. It's like exercising muscles. If you don't exercise them by a certain point in your life, and if you don't get certain types of coordination, if you will, it's kind of hard to learn later on. And again, I don't want to make that a hard and fast rule, but
Right.
I don't want my kids to be intimidated by those questions. So while I'm going to be realistic about the danger of some of the things they're going to face, Holly and I have found the same thing. It's opened doors for us to have conversations with our kids that I don't think we would have otherwise had, at least not with the sense of urgency. It wasn't just like some disembodied, interesting topic that I heard somebody talking about. It was like, this was from my class, and some students felt really strongly about this. In fact, back to the thing of opposition, I haven't seen my students, or my daughters face much in the way of opposition from teachers, but it has come from other students. And that's actually been healthy for them.
Yeah.
Yep.
And I think what you're saying as well is it's the discussions you're having at home. And I think if your family is rooted and strong, talking to each other, and we all know how important it is to sit around the dinner table and be together and to ask questions that are more than just, how was school today? Fine. And you move on. To ask questions that are probing, that get them talking, that get them sharing, which is hard to do.
It is.
Especially, we've been really fortunate, very, very blessed, I should say, that our kids do like to talk and they do share. And I'm sure it would be tough with kids that maybe are more closed off, but you just have to find those ways to kind of get in and figure out, okay, what's happening at school? Let's talk about this.
You're so right.
Yeah.
Especially as they get into high school. Those aren't always easy, or junior high. But it is an art, and it's well worth the pursuit. A couple questions as we're wrapping things up here. How do you think about this biblically? Paul, you've touched a couple of times on being salt and light in the darkness, light of the world. Are there any other biblical principles that have informed you over the years, or that kind of come to mind as you think about putting your kids in this kind of a setting?
I really just want them to feel comfortable around non-believers.
Yeah,
I guess
Jesus was.
even for me, I mean, I grew up in a large family. I'm the youngest of 14 kids. And so there's so many different personalities, different beliefs, different morals, values, and all those things that, and even my friendships growing up, because I didn't become a Christian until I was out of college, but I'm so happy that I still maintain those friendships that I had that are from my non-believing friends, because I still have those friendships, and a lot of them I brought to church over the years, and it's nice to know how to act around non-believers. I grew up around them. I kind of know what it's like to be on the other end, because I was where they were, and I'm in a different spot in my life right now.
Yeah.
And hopefully they see that, and I try to just model that new Paul to them, and it's just so much more effective with my testimony. It's just trying to model it, be kind to them. I never, would ever get rid of my old friends. I really value my old friendships. I love my
That's beautiful
non-believing friends, and I want my kids to be able to be that way with the people that they meet. If they're a non-believer, those are ones I tell them to seek them out. They don't know Jesus. That's
what was
okay.
Your line?
Just be
a leader.
Be kind to them.
Oh, be a leader and be a light.
That's so good.
And just reading about Jesus in the Bible, he did not surround himself with only Christians. Well, they weren't called Christians back then, but he didn't only surround himself with people who believed in him and practiced everything he practiced. He went into the world to reach out to people that were unlike him, that needed him. And so sending our kids to public school in a way is like saying, we're going to emulate kind of what Jesus did. We're surrounding ourselves at church on Sundays and on youth groups and other activities with fellow believers. But then we're going to also go out into the world and we're going to try to reach out and love on people who
and not judge them and just accept them right where they're at.
Love them like Jesus loved them. And I like the way you just said that there, Janelle. It's a tension. We've been talking about this tension the whole time. It's wanting our kids to be in a dangerous world, a world that's full of lies and influences, but also they are connected with Jesus and with the truth. And so, you don't shy away from one to have the other. You're entering both, and you have to have both. One scripture that's been really, really informative and helpful to me is from the book of Daniel, and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and Daniel, they were native exiles. That's the name of our podcast. They were exiles in a foreign land who were still trying to follow the ways of God, but they weren't at home, and they weren't in a culture that honored their beliefs and lived a biblical worldview. And I think we're often afraid of information or influence, but what we see there is that the issue was worship, because they didn't worship the gods and the idols around them. They stayed in touch with God, and actually Daniel 1, chapter 1 says, God gave these 4 young men knowledge and understanding in every kind of literature and wisdom. Daniel also understood visions and dreams of every kind. I mean, we're talking about an entirely pagan culture. This is like sending your kid to a Hindu temple to get, indoctrinated and educated. Nothing like we at least have a multicultural platform world that we live in. So even in that, God was able to guard them by his Spirit because they stayed in touch with him. And so I really think it's important for us to see that worship is the ultimate issue. It's the heart issue. The disinformation and the negative influences, those are always going to be there. They're there in Christian schools. They're there in homeschooling co-ops. They're there in my neighborhood. They're there in my church even. We don't have perfect Christians in our churches.
You're never going to be able to protect your child 100%. You just can't.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's close with this, because I think one of the things I admire so much about both of you, and we're going to get a little personal here for our audience, but my daughter every Saturday night heads to your house for a Bible study. And I mean, it's amazing how many kids are at that Bible study, and they're not all students from our, youth group here at the church. Several of them are from the local high school. I mean, I guess I've answered the question for you. What are some of the good things you've seen come out of that? But just tell us a little bit about that Bible study, how that came about, and how it's really touching lives.
Well, Weston went on a missions trip, the Mexico missions
Right.
trip last year. And when was it even before that? It might have even been before that. Well, I think it was after summer camp last year, they started getting together with a group of kids from camp. They missed camp so much. They love that. There's a summer camp that Alderwood does every year, and they just love it. So they started getting together. And then there was the missions trip that he went on, and they just really were experiencing these times of really great fellowship with each other, and they wanted to keep it going. So he and another friend and my daughter, they were talking about starting up a little Bible study, and started with about, 8 kids or so.
Mm-hmm.
And they'd come over and hang out, and they were studying different passages of scripture. And they would maybe do a Bible study 45 minutes or so, and then they'd have hangout time and just have fun. And it's grown now. I think last week we had 30 kids at our
That's
house.
amazing.
Something
Well,
like that.
there is Janelle's
30.
legendary meals.
That's
I hear
true,
about
yeah.
them every week. I mean, if
You
you
cook
feed
food,
them,
they will
will
come.
I keep saying kids will just kind of flow through the door because we don't know who's coming or who's showing up. And I'll look at Paul and go, loaves and fishes, loaves and fishes.
Multiply.
She always has something in her back pocket in
I'm
case
sure
there's
she
not enough.
does.
But you know what? I said to him just a few weeks ago, the kids were all downstairs and hanging out and playing different games. And I said, we are so blessed. We are so blessed that there are all these kids here from all sorts of different walks, some from our church, some from our kids' high school, some from sports teams and different things. And they're choosing to be here on a Saturday night. They could be anywhere. They could be out at a party. They could be out with a boyfriend or girlfriend. They could be doing who knows what. And they're here on a Saturday night studying
Learning about
God's word
Jesus. Yeah.
and hanging out and just being kids and having fun.
That's so great.
And I just feel really blessed that I can do that. And if that means
Yeah,
I need
we're
to
more
feed
blessed than
50
they are,
people,
probably.
I'll feed 50 people, you know?
Yeah.
We're like, just keep them coming.
That is so great. I not only deeply appreciate that personally, but I appreciate you guys sharing that with us and sharing your experience. Again, we're not trying to paint with a broad brush here, but we really appreciate you guys sharing how God's worked in your life and in your kids' lives and used you as parents to really make this public school experience something that God has redeemed and used for good. Really appreciate you both. Paul and Janelle, thanks for being here.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks.
All
Our
right.
pleasure. Thanks.
Hope you enjoyed that time with Paul and Janelle. Really appreciate their candor and honesty about the challenges of sending our kids to public school, but also the potential that it holds, that our kids can do more than just survive. They can thrive and flourish in the public schools by God's grace. Have really enjoyed exploring this with you, and we'll look forward to seeing you again next time on Native Exiles.